Mhm.
In 7 minutes or less, with information that is not available in your campaign literature or on your website, please tell us about your campaign platform and vision for District 1.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for making the time here. I know this topic has been really pertinent on a lot of folks' minds. I've certainly had my share of coffee dates and phone conversations and conversations at the door about this issue, and I'm glad that we can finally get a lot of people in the same room. I'm Anders Ibsen. I'm a lifelong North Ender. I grew up around here right off of Jackson. I was a Proctor District resident myself for a number of years, and I love this neighborhood, and I'm just running to give back to the place I call home. I'm a really big, passionate believer in balance and accessibility, in making sure that we can balance our long-term needs as a city for development and growth with, at the same time, managing the impacts of that in a responsible way that affords people kind of a seat at the table about how we can manage issues that people brought up, like parking, like impacts to our infrastructure and public services. And I'm really interested in learning more and continue that conversation here. And overall, I do my best to be accessible to folks. If you ever want to talk to me, my cell phone is just 370-0201. My info is also, on my website. And looking forward to learning more and talking more with you about this pertinent issue.
Okay.
I like to be brief.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, your next question here. Describe your vision for appropriate development in mixed-use centers, including the Proctor District.
Okay, I appreciate that question. So there's a lot of questions in general about how we got here. That's kind of the major issue about why are we suddenly starting to see a big mid-rise and talk of future mid-rises. And so this conversation for Proctor and other neighborhoods is actually over 20 years old. When the state of Washington passed what's called the Growth Management Act in 1991, it directed local cities in the interests of not only conserving farmland and directing more growth in urban centers, but also for protecting the character of single-family neighborhoods, that it's best to direct growth towards downtown cores and towards areas that are called mixed-use centers. And these are places that, because of the proximity of different services, infrastructure, amenities, they make sense to have more compact, dense growth. Proctor was reserved as one of those as early as 1993. So to some extent, some kind of level of density has always been the vision here since the 90s. And really the controversy started around 2008, 2009, in which was really rooted in the fact that we weren't seeing any growth in any of our mixed-use centers. So that's really kind of the background about how we got here. With me, it's all about balance. It's all about seeing how we can achieve the growth that we want for our small businesses, for our economy, and at the same time balancing that with the needs of our neighborhoods to preserve our single-family feel, the quaintness that a lot of people like this place about, and also responsibly responding to folks' concerns about parking, infrastructure, impact of public services, and finding that right sweet spot.
All right, question number 2. What changes, if any, do you hope to see in the Proctor District? How do you think these changes should be addressed?
Mm-hmm. Well, respectfully, I think that the way I'd approach that question wouldn't be along the lines of what we should change about Proctor, but what we should preserve, because that's the biggest thing I've heard from folks is we generally like the attributes of Proctor that the way things are. And for me anyway, I think that those attributes aren't necessarily mutually exclusive to some level of change. I mean, when I lived here with my wife for a number of years, we were attracted to Proctor's quaintness, the fact that you can walk everywhere, to a movie at the Blue Mouse, groceries, dining, library, post office. You're close to any number of beautiful attractions around here. And for me anyway, I'm interested in seeing what we can do to preserve those features, preserve the events, the liveliness of what it means to live around here. And for me, I think that it's just like any other public policy question. It comes down to balancing. It comes down to balancing our responsibilities and our needs to grow the economy and just follow our state directive under the Growth Management Act, while at the same time respecting the surrounding single-family neighborhoods and affording people the right to be able to have a little bit less of a challenge when parking or driving or any number of different ways of getting around the neighborhood. So for me, it's about preserving those aspects that make Proctor such a beautiful place to live and raise a family and move to, and even if you don't live here, just to shop here. And I think that it's just a question of how we can hold on to those things, and even if some things are going to change.
Okay. Next question. How would you describe the character and ambience of the Proctor District? Do you believe that Proctor Station and additional buildings on a similar scale will preserve and enhance the character of the district?
Well, I'd used a few words to describe Proctor. One is lively, because we have everything from weekly farmers markets, we have the Twilight Bike Race, Chocolate Fest, Art Fest, the Junior Daffodil Parade, and it was just wonderful being able to walk out of my front door and there's someone selling me zucchini. I mean, that's kind of the wonderful thing about Proctor, is that there's things to do. And excuse my voice, I'm a little hoarse today. That's facilitated by something that's very, very deliberate about how Proctor was made. I mean, if you want to talk about zoning and planning, Proctor was basically a mixed-use center before we even had a phrase for that, because 100 years ago, back when we had a city streetcar system, Proctor was a major stop in that system, and that actually determined the way the neighborhood was built out. And there's a reason why it's so easy for people to interact with each other and support our local boutique businesses. We don't just have corporate chains and impersonal drive-ins or anything like that. We like it kind of local, and we like that real kind of hometown feel. And I think that mixed-use development is always a tricky balancing act. Those are some of the provisions in the bonus height program, for instance. It's not an automatic 65 feet, for example, but for instance, if you wanted to apply for the extra 20 feet, you would have to do things like underground your parking, like have a brick facade, like have public art, or any number of different attributes that blend the building more in with the character. So I think that if you do it right, and if you account for those changes, and if you can do it in a very wise and meticulous manner, I think that you can strike that balance between getting more feet on the street to support our businesses while also respecting the kind of core attributes that Proctor has as well.
Okay. Next question. Many hundreds of your potential constituents support restoring the 45-foot building height limit in Proctor. Do you support excluding Proctor from the height bonus program, which allows the construction of buildings up to 65 feet tall in Proctor? Yes or no? Please explain.
Okay. Now, I know this is the biggest question most people have here, and it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but I myself am not supportive of a moratorium, and to be perfectly frank, none of my opponents do either. In the words of one of my opponents, Ms. Doyle Enneking, at our League of Women Voters Town Hall Forum, in fact, she basically stated the reason that the previous council and other participants in the over 50 public meetings stated, which is namely that despite the fact that we had zoned this area 20 years ago for some kind of higher level of density for the area, we just weren't seeing any kind of growth whatsoever. And the reason that is simple economics, because it costs the same to build the same building in Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, and the construction costs are largely the same, but the rents are very different because Tacoma's economy is weaker comparatively. Our area median income is about $8,000 less than the state average, and that means that if builders can't get that profit margin at 45 feet or even less than that, then it won't pencil out for them, and effectively that would mean we'd be stuck with that ugly vacant lot across from Knapp's. And so it's unfortunately sort of all or nothing for a lot of our development, is that in a large respect, the developers only really make their profit on that last floor. So for me anyway, it's not just a question of height or no height. For me, it's what I call the other 90%. How can we deal with what the impacts are going to be from extra people living here, and how can we still retain the qualities of Proctor? So for example, can we facilitate a discussion about parking with our planning commission? What's the impact on our infrastructure going to be, and how can we adapt our streets, sidewalks, pedestrian amenities? Is our school district, our libraries, are they equipped to handle that? If so, if not, how can we get them on board? And for me, it's all about achieving that balancing act while still meeting our legal requirements under state law.
Next question. Have you received any campaign contributions from any developers, and if so, how might that influence your decision-making on the city council?
Well, in full disclosure, I have. I've received a few $100s from developers related to this project, and from Point Ruston developer as well. The way I see it, I've always been a pretty upfront advocate about how mixed-use urban development can be good for the city. It's something that I philosophically believe in, irrespective of whether it's a campaign or anything like that. And that's why I believe they've given to my campaign in that respect. For what it's worth, I've also received almost $1,000 in contributions from just average residents who live around Proctor. So what I think that demonstrates is that I'm upfront about the things that I believe, but I'm also fair. I'm also someone who doesn't hesitate in the slightest to answer tough questions, to answer your phone calls, to give out my cell phone. I'm really just a big fan of sitting down and just meeting face-to-face with people to hear their ideas, explain things, answer questions, and learn as well, because I don't know everything. But I think that that's what it demonstrates, and I don't think that any particular campaign year or non-campaign year changes that fact that I want to make sure we have the best balance possible for the people who live here and shop here and want to participate in our community.
Next question. Whether the height limit for development is 45 feet or 65 feet, how would you work to ensure that the Proctor District gets the necessary infrastructure to support mixed-use development? For example, parking, traffic patterns, pedestrian and bike safety.
Well, you're talking my language. I love talking about that stuff. So how I see that moving forward is, like I said, the other 90%. I think that this might be a crude simplification, and you can feel free to correct me afterwards if you like, but for me, the biggest concerns that I'm hearing from a lot of the people I've heard about this comes down to either aesthetics and identity on the one hand, just not liking the height or not feeling that it's in line with the identity of the neighborhood, and then there's concerns over impact, over actual impact that you will find in your day-to-day life from having an extra couple hundred people living in the area. And aesthetics, I think we can deal with to some extent. We do have aesthetic provisions in the bonus height program. It's not an automatic 65 feet. It's only the extra 20 feet if you do certain things to make it look and blend in a little bit more, as well as underground the parking and other impact factors. But I think that impacts are definitely much more objective, and it's I think kind of beyond debate that you need to change some things to adapt. So something I've heard from a lot of people is the corner of 30th and Proctor, for example. I take that street every single day. It's a nightmare sometimes. And what's the possibility of getting something like a turn lane or some other kind of adaptation there? I've spoken with some people who work on the planning commission, a couple of whom live around Proctor. They've expressed a real interest in a parking study of some kind, finding some way that we can adapt our parking amenities so that you're not necessarily robbing Peter to pay Paul, so that you can see that extra growth, but it's not at the expense of people's ability to enjoy the area. So I think that there's a very real possibilities for getting to maybe and getting to yes on a lot of these issues, and I think a group like For Proctor is going to be very instrumental in achieving that, and I'd love to have your help in that process.
Okay. Next question. You have had the opportunity to review For Proctor's purpose, vision, and belief statement. Please select at least 2 statements from the list of our beliefs that resonate with you and describe how you would uphold those beliefs if elected.
Mm-hmm. Well, what struck my eye and what I immediately identified with was open, accessible, transparent government and responsiveness. That's the essence of what I really care about, and I think that the city should always strive to do a better job there. Now, I mean, is the city perfect? Absolutely not. We did have about 50-some public meetings during the 2008-2009 process when we were talking about the bonus height program. But I don't think you can ever do that too much. I don't think you can ever be too transparent when you're in the government. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes the city does get it wrong, and I'll be the first to admit it when it comes to outreach and transparency. I mean, if you want a perfect example on a contemporary issue, it's not related to land use, but look what's happening right now with CLIC, for example, with our public broadband system. We've seen a lot of complaints in the community, and frankly, I'm in agreement with them that Tacoma Power was putting out these kind of predetermined push-pull type questions, talking about what the future of CLIC might be and guiding the conversation in a way to get to the outcome rather than actually listening to people. And I'd be the first to admit that sometimes we get it wrong. And I'll be the first to admit that, and I'll be the first to stick my neck out there and see what I can do to learn if there is something we can do better. So I think that that's the balance that I try and bring and that I think we can really achieve together is we can be up front and we can lay all our cards out on the table about the things that we care about, and at the same time we can still shake hands and we can find the 90% we can agree on and we can move forward together as a community.
Okay. And last question. How would you view your role as an elected representative given that you would be required to take positions on issues on which your constituents, businesses, developers, environmentalists, city staff members, and fellow council members might have differing views. If no compromise between these views is possible, would you support the position supported by the majority of your constituents?
Well, I think land use in general, by its very nature, is a compromise because it's the policy that we set that reflects community values and tries to strike that balance between the values that we have in the community as well as our long-term aspirational goals. So it's kind of the now versus the future, as well as our responsibilities under state law, like the Growth Management Act. So like I was saying earlier, this to me, just on a very kind of crude, oversimplified high-level review of the issue here, it seems the biggest concerns that I'm hearing from a lot of people who talk to me are concerns about neighborhood identity, aesthetics, something looking out of place or something looking like it's more conforming on the one hand. Another concern is how we're going to handle a big influx of people and how are we going to improve our infrastructure and services if they're not up to snuff, so the impact concern. And the other concern is economics and the law. How can we ensure that Tacoma remains economically competitive? How can we really preserve one of the biggest identifiers that I think Proctor is known for, which is the fact that we have small, boutique, local business shops, merchants, restaurants that attract people out here, and how can we continue to ensure that they thrive and they're healthy, they don't get swallowed up by big corporate chains. And the other is how can we continue to pursue our regional and long-term goals of making Tacoma a vibrant place to do business and live, which requires accommodating some level of growth, both economically and under the law. So these are really the four things that I've seen are the biggest concerns. I myself don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I don't think that it's realistic to expect that anyone is going to walk away with everything they want, because this is public policy and that never happens. But what I do see happening is I see people working together to identify those shared values. I see us fleshing out a plan, and I see us striving to do a better job explaining it all so that people don't feel like they're left out of the process. But I do have very, very strong confidence in our ability as a community to come together. We've done it before on very contentious issues, and I think that in the grand scheme, we all love our community. We all want what's best for this place we call home, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation.